Israel attacks military targets in Syria as the rebel leaders appoint a new prime minister and swear to bring Assad's torturers to justice. Good evening. We are live in Damascus, a capital where nothing is normal tonight. The streets are quiet because a curfew is in place, and those crossing the border, as we did today, are finding abandoned checkpoints where regime soldiers once represented a fearsome authoritarian state. But while some businesses and offices tentatively reopened today, there has also been bombing here again, and smoke hangs heavy in several places after Israeli airstrikes on weapons stores, air bases, and even the Syrian Navy. Israel says they are trying to prevent weapons ending up in the hands of extremists. The UN has urged them to stop. Meanwhile, as the frantic search for detainees beneath the notorious Sednaya prison ends, where with the relatives of those still missing as their anguish turns to fury?
The atmosphere has really changed here today. There is a real sense of anger in the air.
And good evening from Leeds. Also tonight, the Chancellor is demanding government departments find 5% in savings over the next 4 years by cutting wasteful spending. Rachel Reeves denied it was an austerity measure, as the Treasury said, where spending is not contributing to a priority, it should be stopped. And Luigi Mangione has been charged with the murder of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson in New York City last week. The Ivy League graduate was tracked down to a branch of McDonald's in Pennsylvania yesterday after being recognized by a customer.
In a civil society, we are all less safe when ideologues engage in vigilante justice.
Well, 2 days after the collapse of the Assad regime, the new de facto government is slowly taking shape, with the leader of the HTS stronghold in Idlib appointed as the interim prime minister for the whole country. And all as Syria continues to face Israeli incursions on land and sea. Our international editor, Lindsay Hilsum, is with me here in Damascus.
Krishnan, I came in from Jordan today, and as you found from Lebanon, it was peaceful. The rebels on the checkpoints, if we can still call them rebels, fighters, were quite calm, they were quite kind, they were happy to see us. But what people in Damascus have been talking about are these Israeli airstrikes. I was speaking to some who said the noise last night was absolutely terrifying. And Israel has carried out more than 300 airstrikes since the Assad government fell. And then also up in the northeast, the Turks have also been bombing, presumably what they see as Kurdish targets, because they're worried about the Kurds getting more power and that spilling over into Turkey. So what we can see is people here are calling it a revolution. People here that I've been speaking to are happy about what's going on. But what happens here in Syria doesn't stay in Syria. From across the water, Syrians could see and film the Israeli strikes that destroyed their country's naval fleet. The Israeli defense minister said they were only acting to protect Israel's borders, although the port of Latakia is 650 kilometers from Tel Aviv. Israel hit a weapons site in Damascus too. Smoke was still rising as we drove towards it this afternoon. Israel bombed this place 3 times overnight. It's called the Scientific Research Center. That's a euphemism. It was a weapons development facility. What people I've been speaking to say is that they know there used to be chemical weapons there. We don't know if there still were. Israel has also seized a strip of territory on the border, causing anger and resentment. A group of people I met told me they believed that Israel, the US and Britain had supported Assad and now wanted to deprive the new government of his military assets. Earlier on the road from Jordan, we saw remnants of Syria's military, an army that once dared to attack Israel, but in recent years, a hollowed-out force busy repressing the Syrian people. There obviously was a battle here. There are bullet casings all over the ground. So Assad's forces did put up something of a fight in this place. But in the end, They just abandoned their tanks and fled, as they did everywhere. Rebels manning the checkpoints said they weren't worried about escaped soldiers.
هلا في منهم المتخبي بالبيوت موجود هنا بس هو طبعا ضمن السلام تسليم السلاح وإذا كان عليه أي شيء سيقوم محاصرته.
As the fighters established control, a caretaker prime minister said former ministers had handed over institutions and files.
استلام هذه الملفات وتسيير الأعمال.
This means there will be a Syrian government that will handle these files and manage the business during a transitional period, God willing, that may end on March the 1st. The General Command has tasked us with running the transitional government until March the 1st, 2025.
الحكومة السورية.
Around Umayyad Square in Damascus, we found people still celebrating 2 days after the fall of the dictator. Tell me, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling so happy. Finally, we are free here. I'm really happy. We are all happy. We are proud that Syria is free right now.
And do you think that you will stay free?
I hope we're gonna stay free.
Do you trust Jolani and these rebels?
Yeah, actually, yeah, for sure. I trust that people because they do the revolution. They sacrifice for this country. Even I have maybe different thinking with them, but they did a lot and they deserve to be a part of the new government.
Celebratory gunfire, so much hope and so much peril. All people here care about is that the hated dictator is gone. But Turkey, like Israel, has been bombing where it sees a threat. Neighbouring governments are asserting their interests and fearing that the freedom these people crave will turn to chaos and spill over Syria's borders.
Now, the man behind the fall of Assad's regime and the kingmaker of all that happens next is the Syrian rebel leader Abu Muhammad Jolani. So how did he get here? In 2003, a 21-year-old Jolani, radicalized by the Palestinian Intifada and the 9/11 attacks, went to fight against the US-led occupation of Iraq. In 2006, now fighting with al-Qaeda, he was captured and imprisoned by US forces. Released in 2011, he crossed back into Syria to lead an offshoot of the Islamic State of Iraq. 2 years later, he pledged allegiance of his al-Nusra Front fighters to al-Qaeda. But by 2016, he had split with al-Qaeda, beginning a process of consolidation of power over a group that he would rebrand Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. HTS took control of northern Idlib in 2019, since when Jolani has attempted to show moderation towards minorities, whilst also overseeing spasms of repression against dissidents. It is very much the moderate, changed Jolani who is now to the fore. Official HTS language even dropping his jihadi nom de guerre for his birth name, Ahmed al-Sharaa. Well, joining me now is Fuad Said Issa. He's a Syrian activist and founder of Violet, an organisation which supports human rights and refugees in Syria. I mean, first of all, how are you feeling tonight? What state is this country in?
It's a big shock for every Syrian here, but we're so happy that we're in the first days without Assad here. And the Syrians are happy everywhere, like we're feeling that from the people. For me also personally, it's my first time until 2011 to be able to be here in Damascus. Then that's a great feeling. We were trying all the time to continue and following the humanitarian needs around and during these 10 days, and we were doing our best, but the things like could be better in the next days, and this is what the people telling us.
I mean, there is an extraordinary atmosphere here. I mean, no soldiers, no checkpoints, no instruments of the state. I mean, people are ignoring traffic lights, which is sort of an indication of sort of the mood people are in. Do you trust it?
I mean, we were shocked. All of us are not believing what's happening, how you can drive your car from here to Idlib and going back to Daraa and going all through Syria without any checkpoints, without any soldiers. And how is it like the freedom here, and how is everyone telling the stories, speaking We don't understand what's happened and how it could be in the future, but the people have a very great hopes for the future.
Now you as Violet, as a humanitarian organisation, you have a lot of experience of working with these people in HTS.
Yeah.
So, I mean, tell us about them in terms of how trustworthy, how competent, how moderate they are.
I think there is a huge changing in their also mindset during the last 3 years, and how we find the things happening here in Damascus is so different from what we see before in Idlib and other places. Now they are acting in very well way, as we are see we have a full freedom as a humanitarian organization to work on the ground, to do our response, and also to work with the people. And we're still there is some worries from the people on what could happen in the future, how the things going, and also especially with the services, because all the government falling down now, and now we need to look for our future. But in general, the people feeling comfortable, and we are in Violet trying also to expand our services in whole of Syria.
But this is also very fragile, isn't it? I mean, our correspondents have been, reporting a very febrile atmosphere and a lot of anger, particularly around the prison and the whole question of prisoners, and real fury amongst the people affected by that.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think that will turn into something bigger?
I'm not sure what will happen, but I mean, as a humanitarian organization, we are trying all the time to focus on how we can be, able to work with Syria and to support them, and how all of those refugees could be back to their home, and that were happening now. The people are coming from all the borders, from Turkey, Lebanon, and other places to just arrive to their cities, and that's what the matter for us.
Now, what about the bombing by Israel? I mean, they say that this is responsible bombing, that this is the taking out of chemical weapons stores, of any weapons of mass destruction that could be used by extremists, either against Israel or Western targets. I mean, what do you make of that explanation, and how do people here feel about it?
I mean, that's unfortunately a crime against the Syrian people when you destroyed all of the services and things in Syria, but the militaries also as well. But in the end, the people are not so much interested in that, to be honest, because they are feeling somehow, unless the people in Idlib and the other were all the time just thinking about the bombing coming to them as a humanitarian people, the normal life. Now it's a different story. Then the normal civilians are not just, so connected with that, and there is no that much communication about these things.
And what can you tell us about the new Prime Minister? Do you know anything about him?
The Prime Minister were working in Idlib in the last 2 years and we worked we were coordinating in the area of their control, and they were helping us, especially the last 2 years. In the beginning, they were struggling with this government for a humanitarian organization sometimes, but the last 2 years were great to Idlib and to the area. They were working to develop the area, and they were supporting the humanitarian organization. But
and do you believe they will help the whole country, or just the people from their community?
We do hope so, because the acting, how they are act now in Damascus, how they are trying to do the work. Today we were in many places in Syria as a Violet. We were in Latakia, we were in Tartus and the other cities where that was something unbelievable to have someone from Idlib helping the people in this area. We were all the days, our teams were just distributing the breads and helping the people, and that was with accepting from this government. They were saying that no problem, go and help the people and the need, in everywhere in Syria, and that's somehow giving us the hope that Syria will be back for all Syrians, and they will act as we hope as a Syrian, and also they will have international relation in better way with the other governments, especially the governments who were supporting the Syrians, the humanitarian also organization during all of these years.
Fuad Saidi, so thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, the leader of HTS has vowed to pursue officials responsible for torture and war crimes during Assad's violent regime. Sidnaya prison just outside Damascus has become a byword for the brutality meted out by his enforcers. When the Syrian government collapsed, families of those detained rushed there in the hope of being reunited with loved ones. But as rescue workers end their search, many families remain in limbo tonight. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent, Porrick O'Brien, joins me now. All right.
Krish, we arrived in Damascus yesterday, went more or less straight to Saydnaya. We returned there this morning and spent most of the day there. I have to say I've never seen or heard anything like it in my journalistic career. It's an enormous complex. It's over about 10 stories, at one point 11,000 prisoners inside, many of them from the opposition. It was a torture and execution centre. It was a termination camp basically, but one that just closed the day before yesterday. I should warn viewers that, as you'd expect, there are graphic descriptions of torture in our report. A new dawn over Damascus, framed by the smoke from another Israeli strike. Assad's weapons facilities hit so militants don't get their hands on what's inside. This morning, en route to one of the world's most infamous prisons, we stop at this square in Damascus. The preamble to the hope of normality's return: sweep up the cartridges, tiptoe on tank turrets. But all of this belies the anger and the pain. Much of it produced in Saydnaya prison, Syria's trauma factory.
ذنبهم انه طالبوا بالحريه، هذا كان ثمنه، بعده كله اثار دم.
60 people from this man's neighborhood in Idlib were taken here. They all disappeared. He shows us nooses he's found in the cells, rope stained red with blood. This woman's 3 sons taken here from Dara at the beginning of the Syrian uprising 12 years ago. She hasn't seen them since.
بدنا نعرف وينه الميت، يعني نعرفه خلص مات بسبيل الله، والطيب نشوفه ترد روحنا علينا. أنا قاعد أموت، أنا من قبل الحج أموت، والحج العالم طلعت كلها وأنا ما طلعت. دخيلك يا الله ارحمني.
Thousands have died and gone missing inside these walls since 2011. The torture and the murder is well documented. But being inside is different. And being brought in by a mother looking for her 3 sons is something else entirely. She brings us to the giant iron press. She and others told us it was used to compact the bodies of the executed for easier disposal.
عم يعدموا هون ويكبسوا هون.
هلا شو هذا الموجود هون؟
مكبس عالم، مكبس بشري.
This grotesque machine, again, well documented. We spent the best part of 2 days here, saw and heard accounts of unspeakable things. But some of the worst were the hundreds of calculated humiliations administered to every person every day. Muhammad was tortured here for 6 years, set free 2 days ago. But it's the smaller things he remembers.
يفوتوا لنا شاي مثلا، يفوتوا لنا بالشاي الجاط هالقد فيه، كبوا لنا اياه بالارض. نحن الشاي شلون نلاقيه؟ طب بدنا نشرب، نحن بدنا شيء حلو يعني لجسمنا. نجيب اسفنجل نعصر باسفنجل، نعصر بالكاسات البلاستيك اللي عندنا.
Then the guards would stand there laughing at them. In front of the prison, a huge crowd gathered, and they were angry. It was directed at the Alawite community, from where much of Assad's support came from. The Sunni Hayat Tahrir al-Sham spearheaded his downfall, but how will they deal with the possibility of sectarian violence? So we were here yesterday, and the atmosphere has really changed here today. There is a real sense of anger in the air. This could be HDS's one of their first priorities, one of their first challenges. People here are much angrier. The man you've just heard on the truck had a list of 50 officers that used to work in this prison. He says if they do not get justice soon, they will go into those Alawite communities along the coast and they will seek their own sort of revenge. All day long, people pored over discarded lists of prisoners and of executions, looking for clues of loved ones' whereabouts, told us stories of extreme torture. But perhaps the most poignant testimonies, mothers and fathers listing the names of their missing ones.
حسام زين الدين،
معتقل ياسر محمد خير المظلوم، واسماعيل محمد خير المظلوم، وبشار دولة.
محمد الأحمد الأحمد
نضال أبو عساف محمد عباس حسين إبراهيم أكرم مرعي.
Praying that the people named would somehow hear this roll call.
Well, the UN has urged Israel to stop its airstrikes on Syria, saying it could impede the country's transition to peace and stability. But Israel's Prime Minister insisted tonight that it was essential to stop weapons falling into the hands of jihadists. Earlier, Benjamin Netanyahu appeared in court. His argument that he has a war to run, failing to prevent his trial on corruption charges from going ahead. Here's Jonathan Rugman.
With the Syrian dictator's downfall, Israel has seized its moment, with hundreds of airstrikes in the last few days. Their aim is to destroy Syrian helicopters and jets, to prevent the rebels who've taken over from arming themselves. Among the targets, the port of Latakia on the Mediterranean, quickly vacated by the Russian Navy last week, but Syria's own fleet still a sitting duck for the Israeli Air Force.
From here I warn the rebel leaders in Syria. Whoever follows Assad's path will end up like Assad. We will not allow an extreme Islamic terrorist entity to act against Israel.
We are continuing to see Israeli movements and bombardments into Syrian territory. This needs to stop. This is extremely important.
Israeli paratroopers have also advanced beyond the Golan Heights they captured from Syria over 50 years ago into what they're now calling a sterile defensive zone, though who knows how long they will stay. The Israelis inadvertently helped topple President Assad through their attacks on his Iranian and Hezbollah allies. Now they say they're not meddling in the country's future, even if to some it might look that way.
We have no intention of interfering in Syria's internal affairs. However, we do intend to do what is necessary for our security.
But Mr. Netanyahu is under siege himself. Earlier he appeared in a cramped courtroom in Tel Aviv. His trial now moved underground for his own safety. In the state of Israel versus its own Prime Minister, charged with bribery and fraud. His line of defence, I'm running a country, I'm running a war. His trial began 4 years ago, and his lawyers have been battling to delay this first appearance. And it's a trial which forced him out of power and then into coalition with Israel's far right. These latest airstrikes on Syria may help keep that coalition together and the Prime Minister in office, even though he says it's to stop weapons falling into the hands of jihadists who might help Iran and attack Israel. Neither of which seems likely, given that the Iranians backed Assad and that Israel is the least of Syria's problems right now.
Well, the Israeli government spokesperson David Mencer joins us now live from Tel Aviv. Thank you for joining us. When you say that you're trying to stop weapons getting into the hands of jihadists, who do you mean? Do you mean HTS, who are now in control of this country?
Thank you for having me on, Krishnan. Nothing would make us happier in Israel to have a peaceful border and peaceful relationships with our neighbours in Syria. We hope that does indeed come to pass with whatever the leadership takes place or if it forms in Syria. But we simply do not have the luxury of waiting to see what happens, as you do in London. This is our neighbourhood. In Israel, we've got to do what we need to do to protect ourselves. We can't have jihadis embedding themselves on our northern border and chemical weapons in the hand of jihadis. We hope that they are these moderate jihadis that we're all hearing about. Chemical weapons in their hands is simply not a good idea. So we're taking care of them.
This is all preemptive, isn't it? I mean, they're not attacking you as things stand. They're not attacking you. They're not advancing towards you. And the question is who you mean. You know, do you mean the likely government of the new Syria?
We mean that anyone that means to attack us. We've got our eyes wide open here. I say again that we very much hope that there is a new beginning for Syria. No one can have been helped but been moved by how the Syrian people have shaken off this dictator. 500,000 people Assad is responsible for. We're all moved at them shaking off the dictatorship, but chemical weapons and fighter aircraft in the hands of jihadis, the same jihadis that evolved from ISIS, the same jihadis that evolved from Islamic State and Daesh, is simply not a good idea. The US has taken action in the last days or so against ISIS, and we are as well, because these weapons falling into the hands of jihadis is simply not a good idea.
Well, I mean, you're still being a bit vague about who you mean precisely, but I mean, why are you attacking the Syrian Navy, for example? There's no question of naval warships being in the hands of ISIS. You know, that is precisely the kind of attack that the UN means when it says you are destabilizing this very fragile situation.
Again, in London, you have the luxury to wait and see what happens. We simply don't have that luxury here in Israel. These are jihadists. Okay, so Israel instructed...
No, but why are you attacking the Navy? There are no jihadists taking over the Navy.
So I'm not sure what you mean. If there is a jihadist regime taking control in Syria, or if Iran...
So you do mean to attack the new government here? So all you're saying about how exciting it is, you mean the government here, HTS. That's what you're trying to attack.
We're protecting ourselves against jihadis. The new government doesn't need chemical weapons. It doesn't need fighter jets right now. It needs to rebuild a life for the future of its own citizens. We want that to be a peaceful future on our northern border. We simply don't have the luxury. After the October the 7th massacres, these are jihadis which praised those massacres. They want to emulate them. Some of them do. So, you know, you in London can wait and see what happens. We here in Israel don't have that luxury. We will defend ourselves. We're taking these pieces off the chessboard.
I mean, I'm actually speaking to you from Damascus rather than London, but of course a lot of people here will also say, well, who are you to talk about weapons of mass destruction or fearsome weapons, given the kinds of weapons you've been using on Palestinians in Gaza?
We've been engaged in a war against Hamas, not against Gazans. We've tried our hardest to get Gazans out of harm's way. We're close to finishing off Hamas. That's one of the reasons why Iran has been exposed. They are weakened, which is why the rebel groups have managed to take control in Syria. We hope this is a new beginning for Syria. We're desperate for good relations with our neighbors. But if that does not come to pass, then we must have ourselves protected. We cannot have jihadists on our border which seek to replay again the October 7th massacre. It won't happen again.
I mean, you know, bombing your neighbors is not the best way to find good relations with them, is it?
So, Krishnan, you're a little bit obsessed with Israel, if I may say so. We've made very, very clear what our intentions are.
Well, you're the Israeli spokesman. That's why I'm asking you about Israel's policies.
And I'm giving you our policy. Our policy is, number one, we want peaceful relations. Number two, our neighbors don't need chemical weapons. They simply don't need them.
David Benson, we must leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Kieran now in Leeds.
Now, a vital question in the future of Syria is what happens now to the millions of refugees who escaped to neighbouring countries and, of course, to Europe. After the uprisings of 2011 and the violent crackdown of the Assad regime in the years that followed, backed by brutal Russian airstrikes, at least 7 million Syrians, more than a quarter that of Syria's population, fled the country. A refugee crisis that's had far-reaching international consequences, nowhere more so than Syria's neighbours. Turkey has welcomed more Syrian refugees than any country, 3.1 million according to the latest UN figures. Then comes Lebanon with an estimated 1.5 million Syrian refugees. Then we come to Europe. Remember in 2015, Angela Merkel said, we can do this. And Germany is home to the third most refugees and asylum seekers from Syria, 781,000 there. Now, these are the figures as of earlier this year, and they don't include refugees who went on to become citizens of their host country, whether Germany or anywhere else. So the actual numbers will be higher. What about the UK then? Well, the UK is 14th on that particular UN list. Thousands have become British citizens, but in mid-2024 there were 17,000 Syrian refugees and another 6,000 people actively seeking asylum, so waiting, in other words. And yesterday, the UK government announced it has now suspended processing those asylum claims from Syria. And it's not alone. All these European countries also suspending claims, including Germany, France, Italy and Greece, leaving tens of thousands of people potentially in limbo. Spain, though, is not suspending asylum applications for now, while Austria has gone further. Ministers there telling the media they are preparing a deportation programme for Syrians without giving much further detail. Now, what happens next then depends a lot on the actions of HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, in Syria, the new force in Damascus. They are considered a terrorist group by the UN Security Council and many governments, including the US and the UK. Now, that's a clear obstacle for governments who are thinking about their approach. But with most Syrian refugees, as we heard, in neighbouring countries, there's the potential for huge movements of people back to Syria, whatever governments in Europe decide.
So what should happen now to the millions of Syrian refugees who escaped to Europe and other countries? David Miliband is head of the International Rescue Committee and former British Foreign Secretary, of course. He joins me now from New York. Syria must have been your biggest challenge over the last decade. What should happen now to the millions of people who are spread out around the world?
Hi, Krishnan. Good to be with you. Syria has been on our emergency watch list for the last 13 years since the civil war began. We've never fallen for the argument over the last 3 or 4 years that the war was somehow over. And we have about 850 International Rescue Committee staff who are working, 450 of them in the northwest of Syria, where the HTS was one of the large organizations in control, another 400 in the northeast of the country. I think that the most important thing for people to understand is that the vast majority of Syrians who your colleague has just described, whether they're in the Middle East or they're in Europe, and we work in Jordan and Lebanon as well as in the UK and Germany, the vast majority of the Syrian refugees do want to go home. They still talk about their homeland being Syria, but they were too scared to do so. And we've always argued that no one should be deported until it was both safe for them to go home and they wanted to go home. And I think that you'll see large numbers of Syrians looking very carefully at what's happening. Those who are mobile, especially those who are individuals, maybe their kids have grown up and are no longer at school, they'll be the first to think about going back. The imperative, I think, though, is that this be voluntary, because with compulsory deportations to a place that people don't think is yet safe, we're going to end up in an even bigger mess than we are at the moment.
So are you disappointed to see European countries, including Britain, pausing their decisions on asylum, when, after all, people must still be afraid for their futures?
Well, I think you can understand why it's impossible for an asylum determination to be made at the moment, because an asylum determination has to establish whether or not it's safe to go home. Everyone is waiting to see how the Syrian situation develops. I know from our own teams on the ground that they've been working in a very coherent and disciplined way in the northwest of the country over the last 12 years or so. They've been able to cooperate with the authorities. Civil authorities were established in the northwest of the country so that there was no issue to do with terrorist designation. We worked alongside the civilian authorities in the northwest of the country. So there's a track record there of an established presence that was able to govern that part of the territory. Obviously, the northeast of Syria is a very different kettle of fish. It's Kurdish area of Syria. I think it's reasonable that European countries are saying, we want to see the opportunity grasped. We're not able to make a determination now, but I think it's very important they stick with the idea that returns need to be voluntary. In our experience, there's a lot of Syrians who've already gone back, including from Lebanon. That started about 6 weeks ago, actually, but it's picked up recently because I think many Syrians, often with attachments to local civil society organizations that still exist within Syria, want to make the most of the opportunity that's been created.
Right, but many of their homes remain destroyed. I mean, there is terrible devastation right across this country still, and cities like Homs and Hama have not been rebuilt since they were smashed up by the regime during the war. Do you think the outside world now is going to have to help Syria rebuild, and that means engaging potentially with HTS if they become a big part of the new stable government?
Well, the short answer to that is yes. I'm sure that there has to be an international effort around the rebuilding of Syria, although I would say that in contrast to the situation before the COVID pandemic, the European Union and the UK actually had committed to help with the reconstruction of Syria. Now, with the invasion of Ukraine, the issues there with the recovery from the pandemic, I think it's much more sensible to look towards the Gulf as the area that will be sponsoring the rebuilding of Syria. On the wider question of governance, I think that the facts on the ground are that the HTS are in control. And that means that engagement in the end is going to have to be essential, because our experience as a humanitarian agency around the world, whether it be in Afghanistan, whether it be in East Africa, in the end, if you want to reach the people, you have to engage with the government.
David Miliband, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, we'll have more from here in Damascus later on in the programme, but the rest of the day's news now with Kieran.
Thanks, Krish. Here in the UK, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves has promised a crackdown on waste within government departments, insisting they find savings of 5% in the next 4 years. Independent experts, such as former bankers and academics, have been brought in to oversee the process. Well, our economics correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi, joins me now. Helia.
Kieran, yes, our very own Elon Musk Doge Oversight Board, except with bankers eyeing Whitehall efficiencies over the next 5 years rather than a tech billionaire. The Chancellor wants to make crystal clear to ministers and markets that she still has an iron grip on public finances after criticism of her tax rises and borrowing choices. In October, the Chancellor delivered her budget, which raised extra taxes and borrowed heaps more money. But it created a whiff of market panic, and she left herself a minimum amount of fiscal buffer. So she's really rolling the dice on growth here. And while the budget said how much the government would spend overall, it's the spending review announced today that drills down into how that money is parcelled out between different departments.
And those departments, Helia, and the ministers running them, they're not going to like this, are they?
Well, the process kicks off today and concludes in June next year, covering spending across the entire Parliament. That's a little bit longer than we expected, so those wanting long-term thinking might be happy, but the Chancellor is also demanding 5% efficiencies. She says this doesn't mean austerity 2.0, but union bosses today complained people voted to have a change from the Osborne years.
Could the pressures then get worse still?
Well, in March, the OBR will produce another forecast, and the economic winds have not been favourable to the Chancellor. Remember, she promised not to raise taxes on working people. She's now also told businesses that she won't go to them cap in hand. Kieran, that does not leave many options if she runs out of money, hence today's uncompromising rhetoric. Economists say that while department spending overall is set to rise by 1.3%, because health and defence are protected, it means hard-up services like prisons and social care could actually face real terms cuts, which is why the next 6 months will see some very fierce negotiations in Whitehall.
Thanks, Helia. Now, Germany and the UK have agreed a detailed plan to tackle immigration crime. The Home Office said the move would give German prosecutors more tools to tackle the supply and storage of dangerous small boats. Germany has pledged to tighten its law and make it easier to prosecute people smugglers, enabling small boat crossings to Britain. Ministers and police from France, Belgium and the Netherlands were also part of the talks.
We're linking the work we are doing here together as near neighbours, but also stretching right across the continent and beyond to the visit that I had in Iraq, working with the Iraqi government and the Kurdistan authorities and with other transit and other source countries as well. Criminal gangs are operating across borders, and so we have to operate across borders to stop them getting away with it.
Billionaire property tycoon Nick Candy has said he would give a 7-figure sum to Reform UK after it was announced he would become party treasurer in the new year. Mr. Candy, who is married to pop star and soap actress Holly Valance, made the announcement alongside party leader Nigel Farage in Westminster. Mr. Farage said the party cannot fight big national campaigns without the money. Birmingham City Council has reached an agreement to settle historical equal pay claims brought by 2 trade unions. The claims had left the authority with liabilities estimated at £760 million. GMB unions said the agreement meant that 6,000 low-paid, predominantly female workers look set to finally receive settlement payments from the local authority. Healthcare in Wales is to be boosted by hundreds of millions of pounds next year to tackle record high waiting times. An extra £1.5 billion is being put into public services as part of the Welsh Government's proposed £26 billion budget for 25 to 26. The funding includes more than £600 million for health and social care. Patient waiting times continue to hit record high levels in Wales, with more than 600,000 people on one or more lists across the country. And a reminder that this Friday, Unreported World is from Las Vegas, a city at the forefront of America's homelessness crisis. Amid the glitz and glamour of its casino and hotels, we discover a homeless community who say they're being pushed out of tourist areas, many opting instead to live in a network of storm drains under the city.
They ran us around the 4 corners of this specific neighborhood until we ended up here. And they basically tell us that, out of sight, out of mind.
After the break, as the healthcare boss shot dead outside his New York hotel is laid to rest, new details emerge of the 26-year-old Ivy League graduate charged with his murder. Welcome back. It was a private funeral after the most public of deaths. The family of Brian Thompson, the CEO of one of America's biggest health insurers, said their farewells in Minnesota yesterday with armed officers stationed outside. After a week in which his death became a lightning rod for many Americans' frustration with their healthcare, and his suspected killer became a cult hero for some on the internet, a 26-year-old man is now in custody and charged with murder. Here's our Washington correspondent, Siobhan Kennedy.
From the moment the suspect let his mask down to smile at a receptionist and look straight into the camera of a New York taxi, it was only a matter of time before he would be spotted and arrested, unmasked as Luigi Mangione. The 26-year-old who was last night arrested and charged with murder after being on the run from police since the deadly shooting of a health insurance boss who was gunned down outside a hotel in Manhattan 6 days ago.
Congratulations.
How did it come to this for the boy who was top of his class at an elite school in Maryland, who went to an Ivy League college and whose Facebook page reveals an athletic young man who loved to travel and had lots of friends, that he would somehow allegedly morph into a cold-blooded killer?
You think a lot of people who commit such heinous crimes are often outcasts or something like that. This was not the case with him. He had a lot of friends. He was very smart, had a lot going for him. He was everything you would want in a high school student. It's just so weird to see him go that direction.
It was last Wednesday morning that the suspect, Mangione, allegedly gunned down the healthcare boss, Brian Thompson, in Midtown Manhattan, then escaped via bicycle into Central Park, where he ditched his backpack and continued on in a taxi to a bus station. Then yesterday morning, he was spotted in a McDonald's in Altoona in Pennsylvania, about 277 miles away. These photos show him eating inside the restaurant before being arrested with a gun, similar to the one used in the murder, a fake ID and a manifesto that railed against the health insurance industry, including reportedly the words, "These parasites had it coming." The backlash against health firms has been echoed online ever since Mangione allegedly gunned down Brian Thompson, the United Healthcare boss, given his company is one of the worst when it comes to reimbursing people for their medical care or even denying them coverage for their care in the first place. And since his arrest, TikTokers have unleashed a volley of vitriol against the McDonald's employee, labelling him the McSnitch who turned Mangione in.
Shame on that Mick employee. How are you going to call the police on a hero, America's national treasure? For shame.
Police haven't said what Mangione's motivation was, but he'd posted this X-ray of his spine on X, and a former roommate said he'd struggled with severe back pain.
He confirmed that he had had surgery, and he sent me the X-rays. It looked heinous, with just giant screws going into his spine.
So was Mangione denied care for his treatment? We simply don't know. We do know his family was wealthy and owned multiple businesses, yet his mother apparently reported him as a missing person to police on November the 18th. In a statement last night, the family said it was shocked and devastated by Luigi's arrest and offered its prayers to the family of Brian Thompson. Within the last hour, Mangione wrestled with police as he was led into court for an extradition hearing to New York. The scene of a murder that so captivated America and ignited a ferocious debate about its much despised healthcare industry.
Well, welcome back to Damascus, where the streets are quiet largely because of a curfew. But for some final thoughts, our international editor Lindsay Hilson and our foreign affairs correspondent Porrick O'Brien are with me. I mean, Porrick, we've all seen the excitement of this place now, but you've also been very close to the pain and the sadness that is very close underneath.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, what struck me about today, it's curfew now, but earlier today in Damascus, shops were starting to open, the streets were alive, it felt like a city coming back to life. But then you go to that prison we did and you really sense the deep trauma that's in this country. And I guess what I'm interested in now is how will that trauma play out in terms of how government functions? How will that trauma kind of play out in terms of the politics of this place now?
Well, I think that what you really got to there is justice, because I've already spoken to people who are talking about revenge, and I expect you have too. So what this government, almost government, is going to have to do is establish some kind of effective system of justice, and that is not going to be easy. They're trying to say, we are effective, we can control this place, but they're doing that under Turkish and Israeli bombs. People are talking about instability here going from Syria out, but at the moment there's instability coming in as well. This is not an easy thing that these militia are trying to achieve.
When they talk about learning the lessons of Libya and Iraq, do you think they can?
I think they can if they can establish institutions or reconstitute institutions. The problem is that this country was a narco state. It was based on Captagon, a particular drug. That's what it was in the last few years. Are they going to get reconstruction money? Is that reconstruction money, if they get it, going to go in corruption? There are so many challenges that they face.
Thank you both very much. Well, that's all we have time for from Damascus for now. We will be back at 7 tomorrow night, back here again with the latest on this extraordinary change in a remarkable country. From all of us, that's Channel 4 News. Have a very good evening.
Change is brewing. Channel 4 weather, sponsored by DeLonghi Bean to Cup coffee machines.
Good evening. Our weather's looking really quiet over the next couple of days. I'll have more about that in just a moment's time. But first of all, it's time for Climate Watch. And I'm going to take a look back at November, which according to Copernicus, Europe's climate agency, it was the second warmest November on record globally. And that puts 2024 well on course to be the warmest year on record, with global average temperatures above 1.5 degrees. And as we know, the main cause of this is human-induced climate change. Now, back here in the UK for the next couple of days, as I've said, it's looking really quiet, mostly dry, no more than the odd spot of rain in the south and the east, and the best of the sunshine will be the further north and west that you happen to be. And here's the reason for the quiet weather: a big area of high pressure over the UK, stopping rain-bearing weather systems from moving in. Tonight then, not much going on across the UK. For England and Wales, a large amount of clouds, still the odd shower and a brisk breeze across southeast England. Rainy for Shetland as well, but for much of Scotland and Northern Ireland, it's dry with clear spells and a few patches of freezing fog, particularly through the central lowlands close to Glasgow. Frosty in the north, temperatures there down below freezing, -4, -5 in some spots, but elsewhere typically holding up at 3 to 6 degrees. So tomorrow, a fairly chilly start to the day. For England and Wales, there'll be a lot of cloud around, but most places dry. The best of any brightness in the north and west. For Scotland and Northern Ireland, good amounts of sunshine, but locally fog may linger in one or two places all day long. And where the fog lingers, temperatures barely above freezing. Otherwise, it's a chilly day. Temperatures typically around 6 or 7 degrees. Now, by the time you get to Thursday, it's quite a cloudy day across England and Wales. The thickest cloud will be across western areas where there could be a little bit of rain and drizzle drifting in off the North Sea, some hill fog around as well. But for Scotland and Northern Ireland, after a cold and frosty start, there'll be some freezing fog, which should generally clear away. Otherwise, dry with spells of sunshine and temperatures roughly where they should be for this time of year. Enjoy your evening. Take care. Goodbye.
Today's outlook may take a turn. Channel 4 weather, sponsored by DeLonghi Bean to Cup coffee machines.